Too much of this kind of incomprehensible stuff is happening. One moment, Zelensky states in Istanbul that he is prepared to discuss this plan, to agree upon some acceptable formulations, but then his representatives declare, including those at international organizations in New York, in my opinion, some lady, the deputy ambassador, announced that it is completely out of the question. It is difficult for me to comment on such speculations, and we continue to hold the position that, naturally, a diplomatic resolution is always preferable. We had thought, and were almost entirely convinced, that following the meeting which occurred in Alaska, a meeting that had been preceded by the visit of Stephen Witkoff, who carried a direct instruction from Donald Trump. Witkoff brought to the meeting with Putin specific parameters for a comprehensive settlement, which fully took into account our core, fundamental approaches, and most importantly, were based on the understanding that it is absolutely necessary to concentrate on addressing the root causes of this ongoing conflict. The root cause, as everyone who has studied this drama's history well knows, is the West's attempt to absorb Ukraine into the North Atlantic, the North Atlantic Alliance, to create a military threat to Russia right on our borders, contrary to and in violation of all promises that were given to the Soviet Union, and contrary to those agreements, which were already concluded with the Russian Federation in Europe, within the framework of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, GAU. To dictate its will to everyone, it, of course, has been preserved. Perhaps it was even more clearly revealed when its ideological shell had completely fallen away. That is the very essence of the approach which one can describe it in various ways, but America must always be first everywhere, and everyone must obey America. However, this approach is applied not only to Europe, but to all other nations as well. The thing is, Europe depends more on the United States, both in terms of security and from the perspective of its foreign policy direction. In this particular case, of course, and first and foremost, Europe's policy lines regarding Ukraine. No one is listening to it because Europe and its European elites have staked so much. Their conviction that they will be able, using the hands and the very bodies of the Nazi regime in Kiev, to inflict a strategic defeat upon Russia. The same applies to foreign policy. All 8 wars that Donald Trump brought to a halt, and indeed, we truly value his commitment to not starting wars, unlike many of his predecessors, but rather to bringing them to an end. All these 8 wars truly did freeze for a certain period of time. There have been declarations of ceasefires, and just recently in the region of the Middle East, and also between the nations of Pakistan and Afghanistan, between Cambodia and Thailand, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Rwanda. Yes, indeed, ceasefires have been established almost everywhere in those regions. However, these initiatives did not truly address the underlying root causes. And already, problems have started up again on the Cambodian-Thai border and between Pakistan and Afghanistan. And things are far from being so trouble-free, to put it mildly, on the Palestinian-Israeli front. Therefore, the aspiration to immediately put a stop to the bloodshed, it absolutely deserves every possible encouragement. But of course, in order to regulate this situation effectively in the long term, we will need many more painstaking, patient, and unhurried initiatives. Macron, if my memory does not deceive me, just a short while ago, he delivered yet another pronouncement, asserting that Russia had completely fabricated this entire war. There were absolutely no reasons, not a single genuine threat. This whole thing is a hoax. It's simply, and I'm quoting from memory here, the convulsions of a power that weeps over the loss of its statehood, over the loss of its imperialist colonial past. This is the President of France speaking. But I suppose his approval ratings must be quite bad. Or then there's also this other Minister of Defense. You mentioned the Chief of the General Staff, but they also have the Minister of Defense, Mr. Pistorius. I hope I pronounced all the letters correctly. He was claiming here that Russia would attack before 2030. Now, I said, I figured it could be 29 or even 28. What are they preparing their people for? That it's inevitable? This is, of course, an astonishing story. But I repeat, there is no proof Russia intends to attack France. You know this arrogant style that Macron and Merkel both display, not to mention various Belgians, Dutch, and the citizen named Rutte. This arrogant style reflects their confusion. They don't know what to do if they suddenly change their rhetoric and, following reasonable European leaders like Viktor Orban, Robert Fico, declare that it will be necessary to talk with Russia. And let's stop betting on war. They are probably afraid to lose power. Every year, when I come to New York for the General Assembly session, in 22 and 23 and 24, and this year, speaking at the Security Council, I address, looking into the eyes of UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, and I say, can we not at least get a list of people whose bodies were shown on a BBC program as victims of the atrocities committed by the Russian army? I already feel a little bit embarrassed for him, but he is still a respected and honorable man, a general. He says, we have such rules. This is handled by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. But I told him that we had sent an official letter there, and they replied that they have specific regulations according to which they are unable to disclose any confidential information if it could potentially cause moral or any other kind of damage to individuals who are still alive. Well, I'm not even going to comment on this. This is an absolute disgrace for an organization that, when it needs to, publishes any facts. But you must understand, to conceal the names of those who were clearly already used, whose very bodies were exploited for provocation, that is nothing less than a full admission of guilt. I harbor no illusions whatsoever regarding those individuals who are currently in charge in the West. Not with anyone, really. Well, I did mention some exceptions just now. Viktor Orban, Fico, and now Babiš has taken the position of Prime Minister in the Czech Republic. These are pragmatic people. They are not pro-Russian. They are simply pro-Hungarian, pro-Slovak, pro-Czech, and they think about their own citizens. They do not want to call on their citizens to sacrifice their children for the sake of supporting the Nazi Kiev regime. And my former colleague, Alexander Stubb, who served as Finland's Minister of Foreign Affairs after becoming president, and naturally, after playing a round of golf with Donald Trump, now positions himself as a connoisseur of everything, speaking from overtly Russophobic positions. You understand, nevertheless, the many long decades of Finland's neutrality. They still haven't managed to stifle those nascent sprouts, which, in essence, take their deep roots in the Nazi-aligned past of the Finnish state. So, they finally reach a moment of understanding. But, when they're ready to have a conversation, we'll decide what we're going to talk about. They should be the ones to inform us. If they are hoping to just announce, all right, we're prepared to sit down with Russia, are we going to rush over there? No. We want to understand what they'll be prepared to offer for contact, and then we'll decide. Just recently they stole 100 million, and it's only now become clear, only just revealed, that it's probably over 100. Yet another $100 million has been spent, paid out in bribes to corrupt government officials, perhaps someone from of the Brussels bureaucracy, from those nations that are pumping money into Ukraine, explaining to their own taxpayers that they must endure, must suffer. Perhaps there are some beneficiaries there too. I'm not ruling anything out. And Macron, he already said somewhere that he's going to go and participate in BRICS. No one invited him there. I don't think there's a consensus within BRICS, or that even most BRICS members would be happy to see France, given the positions France holds in the global economy, politics, and world finance. No, I believe its proper place is in NATO and the European Union, which, frankly, nowadays barely differ from one another. And, of course, also in the G7, which is on its last legs.